today. Karen is a attorney with Stein Sperling up in Rockville. Um, uh, Karen and our firm work very closely together on a lot of business planning matters, and we have been very successful in doing so. So Karen, good morning, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yep, absolutely. And let's see. So I actually had. I'm going to close out my screen here. I had an outline of things that are important relative to business planning, succession planning, continuity planning. But it occurred to me that I'm gonna call a bit of an audible on the presentation, and because I had the opportunity probably 5 years ago. I got called into jury duty at the district court in downtown Annapolis, and a bit embarrassed to say that I did my best to get out of it, just because busy business owner and spending a couple days in court just was not something I wanted to do. But it ended up that the case I was assigned to was a very successful business, family run, mostly in Prince George's County and Anne Arundel County. And it was essentially run by, the grandfather and the father and the kids, and even some of the grandchildren were involved. So, and they did land development, home building, and they actually had a bank as well. And so it's a fairly extensive business. And the reason we were in court is one of the brothers, actually one of the younger brothers, had a lingering issue related to drug dependency. And they, on a personal side, had tried to get him some help, but on a professional side, from a business planning perspective, it was never addressed. They were all aware of it. They sort of let it linger. And unfortunately, 49 years old, he passed away. And it was literally like a house of cards. This entire enterprise that was very successful, but they were doing everything on a handshake. If Bob needed land cleared, he would call his brother who did excavation work, and then Bob would send Joe an invoice and he'd pay him $10,000. And it just all worked very well. And they were a loving family and a close family. And then when the brother died, it became apparent that not having a formal succession plan and not having a continuity plan caused a lot of problems. We had a case where the defendant was the business and all of the family members, and the plaintiff was the widow. And so we had a family fight. And so I literally sat in a jury box for 10 days. The case took 9 days plus 1 day of deliberation. And so this very successful business, by not doing the required planning, put the fate of a lot of assets and a lot of future ownership and management of the business in the hands of 12 of us sitting in a jury box. And it's a jury of your peers, right? It's a motorcycle mechanic, it's a woman from the Census Bureau. It's just a bunch of people that really don't have a lot of experience in doing this. And so I happened to be in the industry, so I was able to understand a lot of what was going on. But fundamentally, the only thing I could think of was all of it could have been significantly mitigated or even eliminated if we had just done planning. It was just way too informal. And so the importance of doing a succession plan and continuity plan can't be overemphasized. And in particular, I have to tell you, the one thing it just truly broke my heart is in the witness stand was the grandfather and the uncle, one of the children, and every one of them got up there and cried. It like broke this family apart. And so sometimes we think of business planning as just making sure our business is in order, but really it's a much broader set of people that we're responsible for, our employees and particularly our family members. So anyways, we're hoping some of the information we share today will enlighten you in terms of what can be done and how to get it done, so you don't find yourself in a litigation type matter. So with that said, Karen, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with a couple questions,
Sure.
and I'll let you elaborate, and then wherever I can feel like I can interject and add some value, I'll try to do that. So, but so I don't see the response to the poll yet, but my first question is: as when you first engage with a business, what's the typical situation in terms of how many have done any planning relative to business or succession planning?
Sure. I would say some do have a plan, or some have part of a plan, or some have a very old plan that perhaps doesn't work anymore. But a lot of people do not have a plan. And I think the primary reason for that is because they're kind of overwhelmed by the process, right? They don't know kind of where to start, or they don't know kind of what the solution is, right? They spend a lot of time kind of, they know what the problems are, but maybe they don't have all the answers to it, and they think that they need to have the answers to it in order to start the process. And I would say you don't have to have the answers. I mean, what you have to have is access to professionals that do this work all day long, because we sort of help shape the process. We can help shape um, the solution and really guide the business owner to the right place, to where they need to go.
Yes, yep, agreed. And that's very common in terms of what we see when we first engage with a business owner. A lot of times there's just no plan at all. There's an awareness that a plan is needed,
Sure.
but they just find it to be, well, one is you're running your business and it's growing, you're
Right.
busy, and taking time for doing that is just not something you want to do. But you're right. Once you get started and once you engage with professionals, it's definitely doable, and it's not as difficult as you might see. It might seem. Um, I've mentioned two terms to get started here, and I was hoping we could just better define the terms. The title of the presentation was business succession planning. However, our intent really was to cover two things. One is succession planning, and one was continuity, sort of emergency planning. And I'm wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit in terms of what the differences are between those two plans.
Sure. So sometimes people use those terms interchangeably, but in my view, they really are two different things. When we talk about succession planning, in my view, that's really kind of, what do I want to have happen to the business after me when I'm done? What do I want to have happen with the business? Do I want it to be sold to a third party? Do I want to transition it to employees, to family members? Kind of, what is my end game, is sort of how I think about succession planning. When we talk about continuity planning, in my view, that is sort of, what if something unexpected happens before we get to whatever that ultimate goal is. But so, for example, a death or a disability, or if you have multiple owners of a business, a departure or a dispute between the business owners, those kinds of events, I think of as continuity planning. And I think you need really to think about both, and do some proper planning for both.
Yep, yep, I see. Yep, very good. One thing I was going to mention is, we use Stein Sperling regularly for this type of planning, and one of the things we really like is that um, Stein Sperling does litigation, and so they have the ability to see, situations that go wrong, and it helps better in terms of planning to make sure you don't have that happen to your existing clients. And so the planning process really gets helped a lot when you're in a courtroom and you see the potential things that come up in terms of disputes or whatever the circumstances are.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would absolutely say that that dispute, the litigation and the arbitration and all of that work really helps inform the planning process and help avoid and mitigate, because we see, we do so much of that work that we see kind of all the areas in the best example is the case that you just suggested. So much of that could have been avoided with some good planning.
Yeah, yeah. And there's also the question is, when businesses evolve, right? They're startup, and then
Sure.
they're growing, and they become more mature businesses, and they add employees and management. And so
Right.
at what point do you typically recommend that a business owner puts a plan together?
I would say yesterday, really. I mean, now, the sooner the better, because there's so much we can do with either tax avoidance strategies or estate planning techniques. There's so many things we can do with a sufficient amount of runway to do it, and some good planning. And so really, the sooner the better. And to your point, obviously businesses are fluid. It doesn't mean we do the plan now and then, it's done for the next 50 years. Things change. Businesses change, they grow, they ebb, they flow. You have personal circumstances of owners and family members change, laws change. I mean, now, pandemics occur. I mean, right? Things happen. And so plans do need to be revisited from time to time, and possibly adjusted. But I would say, start now.
Yeah, agreed. And that's typically, we say, there's no better day than today to start the
Yeah,
planning. And
yeah,
even though it always seems difficult because you've got, a million things on your plate and your emails are full, you got to just carve out that time, put it on your calendar. So I agree. And also, from personal experience, some of the plans that, we put together, you and I, for our clients 7 years ago, we pull them out periodically, like, even annually sometimes, because as you said, there's family dynamics that change, there's legislative changes, there's things that just cause us to have to revisit it. So it's the business planning and continuity planning is an ongoing process. It's not a one-time event, and that's what's important
exactly.
to know. And so if you feel like you don't want to do it now because things are going to change, that's okay because we anticipate the change. Get something in place now is important. And again, I'll reiterate, particularly, we are personal financial advisors, and there's a lot of interdependencies between the client's personal needs and their business needs. And so, our focus to a great extent is on the family, right? Because if something happens to the business owner, and that's the main asset and the main source of income, we want to make sure that family's protected. So even in the beginning, there's a need to put contingencies in plan and succession plans in place just in case some kind of triggering event occurs. So um, and then we often enter an engagement with the comment that what we really would like now is to have your business ready to sell tomorrow, right? And so our whole, that's sort of the parameters that we create to do all the planning. And so, can you just talk a little bit about what that means in terms of the things that need to get done to make sure you're in a position that if somebody comes in and says, "Hey, I'm interested," that you've got everything, T's crossed, I's dotted, and you're ready to sell the business?
Sure. So there's a ton that can be done in advance to make the company more saleable, make it more attractive to a potential buyer, and to, I would say, also maximize the value, right? To increase the purchase price for the seller. Um, every business is different in terms of what those areas of improvement are, but there are always areas in every business that can be improved, and most of the time the business owner knows exactly what those are, and sometimes they don't. But some examples, I would say, lots of issues that I've been involved in would be the management team, for example, making sure that you've got the right people in the right seats and that you've got the right agreements in place with those people so that they are both properly incentivized, so that everybody's kind of rowing in the same direction toward a common goal. And also to make sure that you've got proper restrictions in place with employees. So confidentiality, non-solicit, non-compete, whatever is appropriate in for that particular employee in that particular business, whatever the circumstances are. But having a good functioning management team in place is always one area that I find that there's room for improvement in terms of trying to kind of make the company more saleable and more valuable. That's just one example. Other things that I've come across could be, formalizing agreements. You mentioned lots of things are often done on a handshake, and so sometimes it's about formalizing contracts or formalizing processes, those kinds of things. It could be, dealing with a non-performing business unit, or it could be areas of exposure in the business where we know that there's some risk that we need to kind of try to mitigate. And that could be something like licensing issues, or perhaps we don't have employees classified properly, or, areas where we kind of want to clean up our house a little bit. Formalizing or updating corporate governing documents, updating minutes, or making sure you have a good buy-sell agreement in place. All of those things, I feel like, kind of come under the category of getting your house in order, getting prepared, sort of cleaning up things, and increasing the value of the business, making it more attractive, making a good first impression on a buyer is really important, right? Having your act together, being able to produce the documents right away when they ask you for them, and you're not looking for them, or they don't exist, or they're not signed, or they're expired, or whatever it is. I feel like all of that goes a really long way.
Yeah, yep, agreed. And I think some of the other, these are just sort of adding on to your list a little bit. Is oftentimes we'll have the business owner will own the facility where the business resides, and so if they got an LLC created that may need help by itself, but there's no lease agreement.
Right.
And so you just it seems like an informal thing because it's the same person, but as soon as something happens to the owner, we don't have a lease.
Right.
So just those
yes,
matters.
Frequently see that.
Yeah, and I know you and I have gone through a list before of corporate minutes being done and employment agreements, and go through that list and make sure it's all in place. Makes you in a much better position. One, if something happens, like we say make it ready for sale, not that we want to sell it, but just because it's ready for sale, we know we've got all our ducks lined up and things are in order, right?
Exactly.
So, and then from a do you have any, and maybe you mentioned it a little bit, any more typical issues that you see lingering? The one that I was going to mention, and I'm going back to my court case, was we had a management issue that was clearly known by everybody in the company. We had a substance abuse issue that nobody took care of, and if they had addressed that early,
right,
it would have been taken care of. And so sometimes these difficult issues, you sort of avoid them and you don't want to address them, and you hope it sort of fixes itself. But you really got to be proactive and aggressively going after it and figuring out what needs to be done, to protect the business and to protect your interest.
Right. No, I think that's right, and that's kind of an extreme example where you've got alcohol or substance abuse or whatever. I would say it could also be something as just lots of times there are just emotional issues where the business owner knows that they need to take some action because it's in the best interest of the business, and there's all of these reasons why they don't. So the one I frequently see is you've got somebody in a role that is not appropriate anymore. Maybe it once was, but the business outgrew that person, or maybe they weren't even ever appropriate for that role. But they need to go. They're not adding value in that role. But Sally's been with me for 20 years, and how can I get rid of her? And so sometimes you find these kind of like emotional issues where you really need to sort of separate from what's best for the business, and that's hard. It's hard to do. And I guess the other challenges I find are fear, right? People don't know what to do, so they don't do anything. They're afraid to start the process. Or it's just like, I don't have the time, I can't focus on it. And but you have to focus on it. It's critically important. And it really is not going to take the amount of time or attention that you think it is to put a proper plan in place if you've got the right professionals on your team.
Yep, agreed. Yes, and so that the whole concept is somewhat nebulous, or when we talk about succession planning and we talk about continuity planning, and we discuss some of the things you need to do in terms of getting your house in order. But sometimes it helps just to review, what do we actually do? Like what are the planning documents that we typically create? Because I think that helps, better define, what that process looks like. So what are some of the documents as we go through the planning process that we normally either modify or create new?
Sure. So the primary document, it would be either a shareholder agreement, or so this agreement goes by many names. So shareholder agreement, buy sell agreement, operating agreement. It's really all the same document. It's the agreement among the owners of the business that really is the continuity plan. It describes what happens in the event of somebody's death or disability, or what if there's a dispute? Do we have a mechanism in place for handling that? Or what if somebody just wants to leave voluntarily? Can somebody just sort of push their chips to the center of the table and cash out? Are we going to let people do that in our business?
Yeah.
Or can we kick somebody out? This owner's not cutting it anymore. We want to basically buy him out and have him go away quietly into the night. Do we have the right to do that? So that's really that's kind of the primary document in terms of continuity planning. It also deals with all the governance issues, just the day-to-day kind of who's going to manage the business, and how are we going to make distributions, and what happens if the company needs money, who's going to contribute capital and how. And that's really kind of the governing document. That's the primary sort of most important
Yep.
document.
Yep. Sure. And as you said, it has different names depending whether it's an LLC or whether it's a stock corporation. But I think one thing that's important that you brought up is a lot of times you'll read an article or somebody will mention, do you have a buy sell agreement? And I think there's a thought that that's a separate document, but really a buy sell agreement is really just having your operating agreement or your share agreement in place, and the buy sell provisions are included in there. It's not a separate document. It's just fundamentally that's the document you need to create as part of the business, anyways.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, and that also, as we talk about making changes, is the document that evolves as things go on, as life changes, and so.
Right.
So it's not unusual for have us, we could be on the third or fourth iteration of an operating agreement just because we've added a new partner or whatever the circumstances are.
Absolutely. Added a new partner, have had a partner leave, the value of the business changes, the industry changes, the world changes. I mean, yeah, they need to be fluid and they need to be revisited frequently. And so, and take a look and make sure it still works for you periodically.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier that we tend to focus. We focus on both the business owner, but we spend a lot of time on the personal side because we're personal financial advisors. But there's a lot of crossover there, and there's a lot of coordination needed. And so we spend a lot of time making sure we've got the estate plan in place on the personal side. But can you talk a little bit about what some of the coordination typically is between the business planning and the personal estate planning of the business owner?
So, in my view, those things really need to go together to be effective. I frequently see sometimes business owners go to one attorney to have their will done, and maybe they use somebody else for their business, and it really all doesn't work together. And nobody's talking to each other, and there's no coordination, and that's a complete nightmare. So, in my view, what you really need to do is have kind of a holistic approach, because it doesn't work unless you've got the personal estate plan tied in with the business succession plan. Frequently, the business is the largest or one of the largest assets of the business owner. And so to understand sort of what's supposed to happen with the business, and where value is supposed to be transferred to the family, and when, and what the plan is for that, that's all got to work together for it to make sense. And so I feel like you really need to take a holistic approach, or you're really doing a disservice to the client.
Yeah, agreed. And back in the days where we used to sit around conference tables, now we sit around Zoom screens. I can remember you and I having around the same conference table, the client's spouse, or the business owner client, their spouse, the estate planning attorney, you as the
Yeah,
business attorney, the CPA, and myself, and literally just going through the document and making sure that everybody's interest is, represented and the concerns are addressed. And so, uh, one of the things we like to say is that it takes, collaboration between all of the various players, coordination of all the effort, and then lastly, um, communication, right? And the
hundred
communication,
percent,
communication,
100%.
as with many things in life, communication is the key. Making sure that all the participants understand, making sure the family understands, and so all of that is required to get the plan together. So, um,
Completely agree.
and one of the key drivers of the entire process is the value of the business. A lot of times we put together a personal net worth statement as part of our initial planning, and then we'll ask the client, what do they think the business is worth, right? And they generally don't know, right? They sort of have a number if they were going to sell it, what they would like to get for it, and that's sort of the value they use, but they don't have a formal process in terms of
And that
value.
doesn't mean that's what it's worth.
That's right, and oftentimes it's a lot different. It may be higher, maybe lower, but rarely accurate, right? And so, how do we address when we're doing the planning, making a determination relative to the value of the business?
Yeah, so I mean, what I always say about value is that your business is worth what somebody's willing to pay for it, right? And so that's kind of the ultimate, willing buyer, willing seller. That's sort of the ultimate determination of value, in my view, is kind of the arm's length deal. But for planning purposes, there's lots of sort of approximations that we can use for value. I mean, sometimes we use a formula. For example, we do that frequently for smaller businesses, even just in the context of continuity planning, when we want to figure out if there was a death or a disability and you were having either the company or the other owners buy out that affected owner. What should that person pay for it? We use a formula in the buy sell agreement. And so, lots of industries, there are, particular formulas. It could be two, three, four, five times a multiple of EBITDA or whatever it is. Lots of owners say, like, this is kind of an approximation that we use in our industry. And so, um, we can use that. We can come up with our own formula that we think is a good approximation. We can certainly you can engage a third party certified valuation analyst
Mhm.
to value the business. There's all different ways to do it for planning purposes. What we really need to do is kind of get close enough so we know what we're dealing with. It doesn't have to sort of be on the nose.
Yeah, yeah. We have an operating agreement for our LLC, and in our industry, it's typically a multiple of revenue. And so, at least for the first few years in our um, agreement, we have that it will be a multiple of our top line revenue, and that gives us a close enough number. And then we also have a fallback to the extent that there's a disagreement. That I think I like the way Stein Sperling drafts the document, because we have a process where we can identify valuation experts, and then together the opposing parties can then select one that they agree upon, and that helps come to a solution in terms of because agreeing on value obviously can be a major dispute. And that process of coming together through using a combination of valuation experts tends to
Hmm.
eliminate that problem.
Yeah, we have a few different mechanisms that we've used there in the past, depending on what's appropriate for the particular business. Sometimes we use one certified valuation analyst, sometimes we use multiple, and we average them, or we, throw out the high and low, or we decide kind of in advance what the floor and the ceiling should be on the value. We've gotten really kind of complex and elaborate with the valuation process, or not, or as simple as the business needs. So there's a lot you can do there to get to the right place.
Yeah, yeah, and so this valuation process can be used for different reasons. It could be for a departing partner, and we've got to buy them out. It could be in the event of a triggering event where our client has become disabled or potentially passed away. And so we need to figure out what that value is, and it's important in the overall planning. The second part of it is, we name a successor, or we figure out who that person is that's going to be responsible for the purchase. And in most cases, or at least in a lot of cases, the value of the business is not something somebody typically has sitting around in their checking account. And so we need to figure out a way to structure the deal that makes sense. And there's different ways we can fund the transaction. And I was wondering if you could just give some examples of either products or devices or methodologies that we can use to make it affordable to the buyer,
Sure.
and also provide the liquidity to the estate, or maybe to the seller of the business.
Right. No, certainly. I mean, the payment terms need to work for a buyout, or it's not going to work. So, I mean, frequently insurance is used, life insurance, disability insurance. That's one way to get some liquidity.
Mhm.
The other is to have the payments paid over time. And so you use a promissory note, and basically have them paid out over a period of years. And you can do monthly payments or quarterly payments or annual payments, whatever, for a period of however many years is the right number, 3, 5, 10, whatever it is, so that you're not causing a cash crunch, whether the buyer is one of the other owners, or some or all of the other owners, or the company. Either way, because frequently, even if it is the other owners, they're getting their money out of the company to be able to do it.
Yep.
So in either event, there needs to be sufficient cash flow, and so we don't want to cause a crunch on the business. Particularly, you're going to have the business and the other owners reeling probably from this other party's separation, right? Having to deal with that loss, and trying to replace that person. And so we don't want to kind of on top of that heap on this burdensome payment obligation. So insurance is one way to do it, and then using a note or some deferred payment method, I would say, is the other good technique.
Got it. Yep. Yep. Very good. I have two related comments to that. One is, life insurance is a cool product. We are fee-only fiduciary advisors. We don't sell any product. I get no commission for selling insurance whatsoever, and I'm a big insurance fan. It's easy. You get the underwriting. If you're a 42-year-old business owner, a term insurance policy for 20 years hardly cost anything. And typically, what we'll do, independent of the business, we'll get a fairly large uh, term policy on the business owner, just payable to the spouse. So in case something goes wrong with the business, we know, irrespective, that the family is taken care of. And you can do it. There seems to be an aversion to buying insurance, and I get it, because it can be expensive. But if you look at the benefit relative to the costs and the things it can do it's an easy solution to fix a lot of potential problems. The other thing I wanted to mention, it's not commonly known that disability insurance, you typically think of, if you become incapacitated, then the insurance company will provide a stream of income to replace the income you may have otherwise earned if you were able to. There's another policy that's available that's paid out typically on a tax-free basis. It's a disability buyout policy. And so in the event of death or incapacity, death, you get a life insurance benefit. Incapacity, you get a lump sum from the insurance company. And so if you're disabled, you can still have this lump sum come in that represents a good chunk of the down payment required to provide to the family. And so I just wanted to introduce that as a product that is not commonly known of. So, but I can't reiterate the flexibility. Sometimes it's even with family members. Just one, maybe a daughter is involved with the business and the son is not involved with the business, and so they end up with more value because of that. And life insurance can equal the estate, and that's an easy solution. And so I think consideration of the use of insurance, and I mentioned some of the players earlier, and it's your CPA, it's your financial advisor. I'll put in there since I'm a financial advisor. It's the business attorney, it's the estate planning attorney. and there's an insurance agent involved in there, and independently as a fiduciary, we can help do the evaluation as to what the insurance needs are and the best product. But invariably, we're looking to provide some type of insurance benefit to make sure that the business that can continue from a cash flow perspective, and that the remaining family members are taken care of. So
I think that's right, and those are definitely the right professionals that you need, and you need them all kind of working collaboratively. That's that's when you get really the best plan with the best results,
yep, yep, agree,
in
agree.
my view.
Yes, and uh, the other thing, so this is a little more granular. Uh, these have been sort of broader concepts, but I specifically wanted to discuss this today because you and I have used it on several occasions successfully. I think it's a unique planning technique that whenever I introduce it to somebody, even a professional that's in the industry, they're less familiar with it, and it's the concept of creating a trust, a revocable trust. We call it like a business revocable trust. And so the family has a revocable trust that owns all the personal assets, but we specifically carve out assets related to the business, and we create a revocable trust, and that trust owns the business assets, and there are certain specific terms. We sort of dovetail it with the personal financial plan, but there's specific needs just for the business assets that we address within that trust. And I was wondering if you could just sort of go
Sure.
through high level how we do that and why it provides, a lot different than most type planning, and it provides a lot of flexibility for the family and as well as for the business.
Sure. So, yeah, this is one of our favorite techniques that we sort of invented several years ago. And right, so it's effectively at its core just a revocable trust, which is not anything proprietary. Um, but the way in which we've used it, well, to start at the beginning, to your point, it is a revocable trust. So it is owned by the business owner. The business owner is the trustee. The business owner can change it, terminate it, do whatever he or she wants to do with it during his or her life. It's not this stagnant document. It's totally flexible. We can always modify it, or even just throw it out the window if after a period of time we decide it doesn't work anymore. So that we love that. So the business owner is the original trustee, and then once the business owner dies or becomes disabled, we have identified a substitute trustee or trustees, depending on the size of the business and the circumstances. The substitute trustee may be one person, it may be five people, it may be seven people, whatever. But these are people basically that we identify now. Um, and these are people who are really going to step into the ownership of the business, not the management of the business, just the ownership of the business. And so these people could be the spouse, they could be, trusted business advisor, a best friend, whoever you think you can trust to sort of do the right thing with your business. And we give them the direction in terms of what they're supposed to do. So we tell them, could be, continue to operate the business indefinitely or for a period of time. Sell it to a third party, transition it to employees, liquidate it, whatever the direction is, basically, we map out the plan and we appoint these particular people to carry out the plan. So these people know who they are in advance. They know what the plan is. They receive trustee fees, so people are actually engaged and incentivized to carry out the plan. And really the goal is to have these people kind of step into ownership. They're not supposed to replace the management team. So the management team, hopefully we've already got in place to
Yep.
kind of run the day-to-day of the business. So these aren't people who need to really know the kind of granular details of how to run your particular business. These are people that kind of just need to know sort of what you would want to have happen with the business overall. And that's because you've told them, and that's because you trust these people to either have the business acumen themselves or know to find the right professionals and kind of pull them in to carry out whatever your wishes are.
Yep. Yep. And I mean, a couple things there. One is a lot of times, a typical operating agreement will cause the transfer of ownership of the business. That's just sort of a natural, let's say, almost like a
Sure.
template type document that's drafted. And this document doesn't do this. This document actually provides the opportunity for the business to continue. And so the idea is that these trustees will represent the best interest of what the business owner wanted and the remaining family owners would want
Right.
in terms of not always maximizing value, but just making sure that the goals are accomplished relative to what the family needs are. And so one of your examples was, we don't have to sell it. We can set up a system that provides for the ongoing running of the business, and so it becomes an ongoing concern. And there may be transfer of ownership, there may be some other things that happen, but there's no necessarily a flat out sale of the business.
Right, doesn't have to be. And so what we do at the outset is when we establish the trust, we basically transfer the owner's ownership interest in their business to the trust so that the trust is effectively the owner of the company.
Yeah,
Um, During the owner's lifetime, he or she controls that trust as trustee. And then if that person dies when that person dies or becomes disabled, then you have these substitute trustees who are basically carrying out the wishes and acting in the best interest of the beneficiaries of that trust, who are typically the family members of the business owner.
yep, yep. And two points also just to add to that. We have used as so who are these trustees? And you
Hmm.
give some examples, and so just thinking of some of the cases we've worked on, these trustees sometimes will act before they become a trustee in the capacity of like a client or customer or business advisory board. And so we have seen somebody's friend who happens to be a business owner,
Right.
somebody that may be in a competing industry,
Hmm.
like the same industry, that knows what to do, but they happen to have a relationship with them.
Hmm.
And so it could be the CPA that understands the
Hmm.
business and the tax
Yes.
consequences. And so we put
Yes.
that team together, and they
Right.
actually, before anything happens, they're meeting on a periodic basis, maybe once a year, just to understand the business, what's going on. So if something does happen, they're much more prepared in terms of what needs to be done when they step into the trustee role.
Totally. And you get to handpick the team, right? You get to now decide who are the appropriate people that I want kind of making those decisions and carrying out my plan.
Yeah, yeah, and we will oftentimes include as part of this group of trustees the remaining spouse,
Mhm.
and sometimes I joke a little bit because this term has changed over the years, but we will give the spouse a trump card, right? And so if the trustees make a decision where she ultimately thinks it's not the best decision, based on what the deceased or disabled owner wanted, or it's not representing his or her interests, they have the ability to, have a supermajority vote
Right.
and nix the whole deal. And so we have the ability to make sure the family is protected, and we have all these other professionals that are trying to do the best thing. And it's just a good balance to make sure that we don't put the remaining family members in jeopardy of a decision that they feel is not best for their interest.
Right. Completely agree.
Yeah, and to reiterate that this is revocable stuff, right? Just like we
Right.
said, it evolves and it changes, and sometimes the trustees, because they may be in a different capacity, we change them, and so it's a very flexible document. And uh, I think almost every case that we've worked on, there may be one or two where we haven't used it, but it just works. It's sort of a universal, very flexible document. And the bottom line is it can act just like a normal operating agreement where we sell the business. So it doesn't preclude us from doing that, but it also gives us the other options, and it doesn't tie us up in the event of a trigger, in the event of the owner, and we're not compelled to do something that maybe is maybe the valuation because of industry concerns at the time is not where it needs to be. And so the trustees have the ability to run it for 5 more years and let things recover and sell it at a higher price, where under some traditional type drafting documents, there's a clause in there that says, sell the business. And so,
Exactly.
so anyways, that is a very specific document, and it's more, it's not a generic planning thing, but I really wanted everybody to hear about it because it's something that I think that will resonate, and that should be considered as you're putting your plan together. So, okay, so we're getting close on time. I only have 17 more questions, so I think I can get.
Oh, good.
So actually, one more question.
Okay.
So, so I have, and finally, as we mentioned, that getting somebody to act on this is tough, and as we said, we empathize completely, given that, particularly in the world today, where life has been difficult. But what is the best way, or how should a business owner start the process? What can they do?
Yeah, I would say it's really not that hard. I mean, don't be afraid. Reach out to the right professionals who have experience in this area. So you mentioned earlier, I think the right people on the team are a financial planner, a CPA, an attorney, but I would, I guess, emphasize that it really needs to be those professionals who have experience in this particular area. There are people that do succession planning in those particular professions, and so seek them out, because they know what they're doing, and they can really walk you through the process, and make it very simple. And you may not have all the answers, but they'll certainly help you find them, because we do this stuff all day long, and so. It's not one size fits all for every business. Everybody's situation is unique, and everybody has their own set of challenges. But there are, a handful of particular techniques and strategies that we use that we found to be very effective. So I would say reach out to the right professionals, and start the conversation, because the sooner you start, the better. You need some runway to do proper planning, particularly to take advantage of particular tax advantages, estate techniques. We can't do some of the stuff we can't do on the eve of a sale. In addition to, we talked about taking certain actions to maximize the value of the business, and so we need some time to do those kinds of things too. So really, I would say the sooner the better in terms of starting, because there's a lot we can do to significantly improve the outcome. But you got to take the first step, and sometimes that's the scariest. But the sooner the better, and these plans are flexible, so it's not like we're going to put something in place that we can't ever be changed. That doesn't work for anybody. So don't be afraid that your circumstances are going to change. That's okay. We'll plan for the changes that we know are coming, and we're going to plan for the unexpected events. And we're going to go into it knowing that this is not going to be a stagnant plan forever and ever, that we're going to have to revisit it from time to time and update it as needed. And that's okay. That's not really any big deal to do. So I would say, get started, and don't be fearful of the process. It's not so bad.
Yeah, and from a practical perspective, in terms of real life experience, every business owner we engage with, we go through this process, and it's not so bad. We get through it. It doesn't take as long as you would think.
Right.
When we finish it, everybody feels good, and I can tell you, without exception, there's all these things we want to take care of, right? But typically we sign those documents and we sit around afterwards, and the business owner client will say to me the relief they feel. There's a weight off their shoulders. They have the peace of mind knowing that they've got everything in order, that their family is taken care of, and it's it's like, that the beginning of the semester when you get assigned the book report and it's overhanging and it's getting closer and closer and
Yeah.
closer, and you finally get it done. And so it's important to do, but from a psychological
Right.
perspective, the relief to the business owner
Yeah.
is tremendous. It just frees them up to do a bunch of other things, and they're feeling good about it. So,
Right, because it's those issues that keep business owners awake at night. You talked about a family business earlier. We do a lot of work with family businesses, and so you've got all the usual business complexities, and kind of layered on top of that are the family dynamics. And so, I've had multiple business owners say to me, I don't know what to do. We've got multiple children, some in the business, some out of the business. We think we should just be fair to everybody and leave the business to all three of them. And that's the solution. And I can't see another solution. And people are just up at night worrying about these issues. And so, we have lots of solutions that don't include that.
yeah,
Leaving it to everybody is usually the worst idea.
yeah,
There's ways to equalize so that everybody's getting equal value, but not actually equal assets. And there are things to do to really protect the business and protect the employees and take care of your family at the same time. And so, yeah, you talked about the sense of relief. I think that's maybe that will be the motivating factor for people.
yeah. I think it can be, and I didn't think about bringing this up, and but now that you have mentioned it, it's so common. It is, and it varies, and as you said, there's various dynamics and family matters that need to be considered. But parents, generally speaking, want their assets to go to their children equally.
Yeah,
That's fundamentally every time we sit down with the
right.
prospect. Yep, let's everybody gets a third or whatever, and but it creates all sorts of other problems if you give the non-participating sibling a third interest in the business. We could have done something differently, right? And so I forgot all about that, but that one comes up often, and there are clearly ways we can not have that happen. And the other thing is just one of it is just from being equitable to all the children. The other is communication is the key. We said that, and so communicating to the children what you're doing, why you're doing it, makes a big difference because you don't intend on doing it, but sometimes you can create resentment by putting a plan together that one of the children, for whatever reason, may feel like they were slighted, and it just so you got to be careful of that. And so putting a plan together that creates it as equitable as possible and communicating that plan is a critical part of the process.
Agreed.
So all right. So we actually do have a couple questions.
Great.
So if you don't mind, I'm going to go to them. The first one is, being a small business, what expenses can be expected to set up a continuity and succession plan?
Sure. So, I would say, it's hard for me to ballpark sort of the cost of the plan. I think you need to start with kind of figuring out what the plan is, talking to the right professionals, and sort of putting together the plan. Drafting the documents, honestly, is not cost prohibitive. The kind of real value is in the plan, is putting together the plan. What is the appropriate continuity plan, succession plan for a particular business? And then obviously we draft the documents accordingly. So I can't say specifically how, succession plans always cost between X and Y. I can't do that because they're all different. But I will tell you, it is not cost prohibitive.
Yeah, yeah, and I would agree. And I also know it's difficult to price because there's so many variables that go into it in terms of time and commitment. But relatively speaking, the cost, including doing updating your estate plan along with the succession and continuity planning, is very reasonable, particularly compared to the benefit you derive. So.
Well, I will say also it is a lot less costly than dealing with the potential alternative of a fight, a family fight. You
Yeah.
know, if there's a family feud and there's litigation or arbitration or whatever, that will be far more expensive. That
Yeah.
I can say.
Yeah. This is a little bit of a digression, but uh, my wife and I watched on either Amazon or Prime or Netflix last week a movie called Knives Out, and
Mm,
I don't know if anybody has seen that, but Knives Out is about a very successful author who had accumulated a significant amount of worth, and some of the dysfunctional family members that uh, were created as a result of his negligence in terms of planning for what was next for the business. And if you get a chance, watch that because it's about the family dynamic. It's a murder mystery comedy, so that's not the intent of the movie. But as I watched it from my a business planning perspective, it was very interesting in terms of all the things that happened because of a very successful author who had accumulated a lot of wealth that did not do their planning. So, my point in saying that was there was a lot of resentment and a lot of fighting in the family because the business owner did not do their planning. So, um, uh, next question is: do you have any particular advice relative to a small business where the there's one child involved with the business uh, that is worth a significant part of our estate, and then another child that this is that question we had about
yeah, yeah,
equal loss in the estate, and
sure.
what are the possible things that can be done to help mitigate that?
Yeah. So, so transitioning to family members, like I said, adds kind of another layer of complexity to all the other business issues that you're already dealing with. But I mean, it really does require good planning and sometimes tough decisions. And I would say, in terms of bringing family members into the business, into ownership, into management, and sometimes those things are different and sometimes those things are the same. You can transition ownership to a family member, but maybe the company is best served by having some other third parties run it. Sometimes those things are separated. Sometimes the company is best served having the family members actually operate it day to day. I think, you know, the next generation really needs to want to be involved in the business and needs to be good at it in order for it to be successful. Um, we represent a lot of family businesses who have transitioned to second, third, fourth generations. And it really requires some good planning and it really requires some time and attention to thinking about management separate from ownership. Sometimes those things are one and the same and sometimes they're not. um, and to the extent you have family members that are in the business and you still of course want to compensate those that aren't, particularly in the case of children where you've got children in the business and children that are not in the business, I would urge you to not leave your business to all of your children, but to leave them equal assets, basically, but not leave somebody part of a business, part of ownership of a business that that have no interest in, have never been involved in, don't have any information about, and really aren't qualified to run. I mean, you talk about resentment that causes real issues in the business and in the family. And so, you use other assets. You can get to the exact same dollar amount potentially,
Yep.
or very, very close, but use other assets. You don't have to give the kids the exact same assets. You don't have to cut the business in half. Make sure they get the same value. So that's
Yep. Very
my
good.
feeling
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah, no, I get it. That's it. And the magic of life insurance also, right, is a potential. If the business owner passes and the business goes to the daughter and the son doesn't get any of it, then we can have a beneficiary designation on a life insurance policy that provides an amount that is fairly close to what the business is worth, and everybody is happy. So,
Exactly.
all right. Well, I said 50 minutes, and we're pushing on like 70 minutes here, so we ran long. But just a couple things. One is Karen, thank you again so much, and
Thank you.
always enjoy working with you. One thing I've always said about you and Stein Sperling is you guys get it. It's not about drafting documents. It's about planning for families and making sure everybody's taken care of. And that's an important difference between you and a lot of attorneys.
Thank
And
you.
I'll give you, I didn't know if you had any particular closing comments you had, but if you don't, that's fine. But I was going to give you, if you had anything to say before we wrapped, and then I'll have just a couple comments just to wrap.
I think I've said it all.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So I think we covered everything, and we truly hope it was helpful. I wanted to just one more time thank Kathy and Queenstown Bank. Very much appreciate the opportunity. Again, I'll give a shout out to Linda and Tracy at the chamber. If you see the blast that come out from them, you realize that they are working every day very hard to help the businesses in Queen Anne's County, and I can't say enough about the effort they put in. And so, thank you for attending today. We truly hope you found it was beneficial.